thoughts on playing with not one, but two future Hall of Fame quarterbacks. And as we continue V Week for cancer research here at ESPN, we look back at the wise and courageous words from our colleague, Stuart Scott. We're glad you could be with us on this Tuesday afternoon. Wendy Nix, Tim Hasselbeck, Louis Riddick, and Josina Anderson. Adam Schefter will join us shortly. You know, it was bound to happen after the antics we saw on Sunday, and sure enough, the league has now sent a message. Here's what they had to say. Broncos cornerback Aqib Talib and Raiders wide receiver Michaeal Crabtree have each been suspended for 2 games, one day after the 2 players were ejected from Sunday's game for fighting. Both players plan to appeal the suspension. Raiders head coach Jack Del Rio had this response via Twitter. Hard to understand the reasoning for this judgment based on the most recent ruling with an altercation. See wide receiver Cincinnati and defensive back Jacksonville equals no games suspended. Maybe so, but not the case for his player. Adam Schefter joins us now. Adam, what happens next with these two?
Essentially, Wendy, the appeals are being heard today. In fact, Aqib Talib's appeal already has been heard by the appeals officer, James Thrash. That call took place 30 minutes ago, an hour ago roughly, and at 2 o'clock Eastern, Michaeal Crabtree is scheduled to have his appeal with appeals officer Derek Brooks. And then the NFL is hoping to have an expedited ruling by early this evening, sometime around 6 o'clock by the league's estimation, that they can get this ruling on these appeals for these 2-game suspensions, with both teams needing answers. As teams head into the work week of preparations and install their game plans, they want to know which personnel they are and aren't going to have. And the Denver Broncos have a question about Aqib Talib. And of course, the Raiders' questions at wide receiver go beyond just Michaeal Crabtree. Amari Cooper went down in the game on Sunday, suffered a concussion on a hit from Darian Stewart, the Broncos safety. And on the very same play that Cooper suffered a concussion, he also suffered a sprained ankle. So he has 2 issues to get through this week if he's able to come back and play. And if he can't, that means that the Oakland Raiders, trying to fight their way into playoff contention, would be without their top 2 starting wide receivers, Crabtree and Amari Cooper, for this upcoming week's game. So plenty at stake today with both appeals being heard.
Adam, thank you. And without question, and it underscores the point that we say it all the time, the best ability is availability. And you pull a stunt like this, you get thrown out, you get suspended, you're not available, and it hurts one thing, and that's your team, Tim.
It does. I mean, really, to me, this entire thing was selfishness. I mean, that's basically what this was about. And you know, there was a history between the players, and so I'm not surprised by the suspension. I actually think that it makes sense. But I know this. I know that if you're not concerned enough, you think about this, for Aqib Talib, he's going to lose about $1 million. He's made a lot of money. He hasn't made enough money to not care about losing $1 million. Michaeal Crabtree, over $600,000. Same goes for him. If you don't care enough about that, I don't know how you're going to care about how it affects your team. I don't think you're wired that way if that doesn't bother you.
I also think that while you can appreciate Jack Del Rio's sentiment to a point, I mean, you know, you tell your kids all the time, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Yeah. And these 2 did have a history. Now, granted, they weren't warned before, and perhaps there's some responsibility there, Louis, but I mean, what did he expect, really?
Yeah, look, Jack is looking at this, I don't want to say selfishly, but he's looking at it from his own best interest standpoint and how this affects his football team. There's a much bigger picture going on here. There's a much bigger concern going on. The league is trying to really right now crack down on what they perceive, and rightfully so, to be an image problem with the NFL, because conduct like this, however we arrived at it, and we know how we arrived at it. We know that this started last year with the whole chain snatching incident. This year, supposedly, you know, Chris Harris says he got punched by Michaeal Crabtree. He goes to the sideline, then this play happens. The chain gets snatched again. Michaeal drives him out of bounds. Okay, regardless, the league knows that right now, these kinds of altercations, which look like a street fight outside of a nightclub at 2 o'clock in the morning, are the kind of things that there is a significant segment of the population that's looking for things like this to continue to advance the narrative that the NFL right now is a league in turmoil, a league in disarray, a league that lacks discipline, and players that are spoiled, entitled, selfish. And that's exactly what this looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. And not only the league needs to be aware of it, but Wendy, I think players better open their eyes and look and say, look, you better pick and choose how you really conduct yourself, and be aware of the fact that people are voting with their dollars now. People are starting to take dollars away from you. People are not tuning in anymore. And whether or not you think that this is this small potatoes as far as this little skirmish on the football field, there's a significant segment of the population that doesn't think it's insignificant. And it's going to start hitting your bottom line. And you better start rethinking your behavior pattern.
Well, I mean, to your point, though, it's hit their bottom line in a different capacity in the sense that they lose money by missing games.
Right, but I mean, bigger picture.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, the league, I mean, you know what I'm getting at here. The bigger picture, the league is trying to, like, say, hey, look, we got to clean some of this up.
They probably should have sent a message a little sooner, but regardless, Josephine.
Well, I just want to say a couple of things. One, I understand that you're saying that for a 2-game suspension, this is probably, sufficient for this type of act. But I think, just like I was talking to C.J. Anderson last night and Von Miller, one thing I think you do have to take into consideration is the fact that this fight happened really early in the game and they missed the rest of the game. I understand from an optics standpoint, you're trying to send a message. It doesn't look good. But at the same time, there's a discussion to be had as to, if it's too much. I mean, 2 games out of a 16-game season. You're also talking about the amount of money that equates to for how much those players are making too. So that's a part of the discussion. One of the things that C.J. Anderson brought up last night, he said he thinks that you have to look at the intentions of the player. He said there was one player who came in there with the intentions of fighting. You had Crabtree punch Chris Harris, before he went to the sidelines, came off and was telling players, hey, listen, he punched me in the stomach. So he came in with that mentality of, he wanted to get something started. Now, obviously, Talib was defending himself to a certain extent, and then it went beyond that with him punching and continuing to extend it once it was separated. But these are some of the points that I was hearing last night. And finally, Von Miller said the thing that's disappointing for him is that these are 2 players that are from Dallas. Okay, they're basically really big stars in that state. And he said it would be really nice to see them squash it, for that state and just for themselves. But, he said that he's a star. We're going to miss Aqib Talib, and we're going to have to do without him as if it was an injury, basically.
Lewis,
if I would here, C.J. Anderson's comment, he's kind of alluding the college rule. Like if you get thrown out of a game in college for targeting early in the game, it impacts, whether or not you miss like the first half of the next game if you miss the second half. That doesn't apply in the pros. That's not the rules in the pros.
Yeah, he's not saying it's the rule, but he's saying he feels like it should be considered.
But if a player's suspension has nothing to do with him getting ejected early in the game or late in the game, that's not an NFL. C.J. Anderson may feel that way because he sees it in the college game. The pro game doesn't work that way, and it never has, and they've never said that it would.
You know what? I mean, there's so many levels here because obviously the discipline starts at the commissioner's office. It filters its way down. So sort of the last line of defense, if you will, is the head coach. And, doesn't he have to, there is no she, so I won't say he or she at this point. Doesn't he have to be a part of the solution here, whomever he may be, one of 32 teams?
Well, sure. The head coach, general manager, ownership, everyone has to be a part of policing their football team and letting them know going into a game like this where there could be some kind of event like this, given the history that the guy on the Denver Broncos team started a year ago. That, you have to be very much so proactive in terms of saying, hey, look, do not do anything dumb like this or react to anything that may potentially go on the football field that would cost us because there's a history that we've kind of initiated here. So when, there's reports that Vance Joseph goes to the officials and says before the game that, hey, you know what, there's a history between these two. Let's see if we can keep this corralled here so there isn't anything that blows up. Well, That to me sounds like this on the outside. Like, hey, I don't really know what my player is going to do. I don't really know how this is going to play out here.
So help me
because
out
right
here.
now, I'm kind of just a little bit of a passenger.
We shouldn't necessarily get into the head of Vance Joseph. Obviously,
I'm not getting into the head of Vance Joseph. What I'm saying though is this: right now, all the conversation is being focused on is about how fair is the punishment, how much money is being taken out of the players' pockets. Is this the right thing to do?
Well, don't do it in the first place.
Exactly. There's an issue here.
Are we being too overly stern when we look at how much of the fact that these types of fights will happen like in a sport like baseball? I'm just saying, how often does this happen? I'm just saying, let me make the point. How often does something like this happen in the NFL? Is it are we being overly stern in this situation? If we were talking about baseball, would we have the same tone? That's all I'm asking.
Well, if these things happen this year. We've had 3 of them happen this year.
If this was happening in a bubble, okay, maybe we could have that discussion. But there's a bigger picture that's going on right now, and that is the image of the NFL and how people are looking at the NFL and the players, right or wrong.
Is there an image problem with baseball when these type of melees happen?
But they haven't had the same issues.
But you know what? I mean, there isn't a full-scale assault on the credibility of football players and the image of football players and the bottom line business of I mean, there isn't a full-scale assault on baseball the same way as there is on football right now.
AJ Green, to me, is an anomaly. That's not a player that gets into fights all the time. It's kind of similar to Andre Johnson when he got into a fight with Cortland Finnegan. You never saw Andre get into this. Now, these players have a history, and you have to definitely address that with the discipline, but I don't think this is a large-scale issue with regards to fighting.
Even, you know what, if there's one incident or if there was 10, the fact of the matter, though, is, Josina, the environment is different right now. The environment is a powder keg. People are looking for reasons. They don't care if there's just one event. If there's no more for the rest of the year, they're going to still go back and they're going to replay that right there on a loop over and over and over again.
And that's why context is important in having a discussion like
this.
But
I think that's where the context comes into play, because you bring up the AJ Green situation, and it's right. It was like, wait a second, this is out of character for AJ Green. You know, we know that Jalen Ramsey has gotten under the skin of players in the past, and there was a shove, and you know what, and so I think the league kind of handled it appropriately based on like the context of that. It was like, hey, you know what, he was thrown out of the game, but man, this is AJ Green. He's not in there battling and fighting, you know, DBs each and every week. That's not AJ Green, and so they handled it that way. But I think in handling it that way, the rest of the league also looked around. Everyone looked around and was like, oh, okay, like no suspension for that. All right, got it, you know. Yeah. And then guys with a history, then the league can't just sit there and go, well, I'm going to handle this the same way I did the AJ Green situation, because quite honestly, it's not. It's not the same situation. It's not the same guys with the same history, and if you don't stop that, then who are the next receivers, you know, in DB's fight?
I think it is.
One game might have been appropriate in this situation.
I think it is absolutely foolish to continue to try maybe and explain away some of these incidents given the environment that's going on right now. I'm looking at this bigger picture. I'm telling you what I am hearing from people who are watching the game and or reading about people who aren't watching the game.
You're right.
And the types of stereotypes that they are just leaning on left and right. And they're looking at moments like this and they're going, this is why. And you know what will happen? That's like, there may be just one person. It's just a small little comment. But the stuff is spreading. It is spreading like wildfire. And I just think players need to be aware of it. They need to be aware of it, that it's out there.
Well, one thing is for sure, they were given 2-game suspensions. They are both appealing. If you didn't hear Adam Schefter earlier today, those appeals are being heard today, and they hope to have an expedited ruling quite possibly tonight. And to Adam's point, these teams do need to know who will be available on Sunday. That will be Week 13. As for Week 12, it wrapped up last night in Baltimore. Terrell Suggs and the Ravens playing host to the Texans, and the Ravens tapping at that playoff door.